Well, welcome to Marking the End Times. I'm Mark Hitchcock, and I'm grateful that you've joined us for this week's program. On this program, I want to give an update on the Middle East. We're hearing about the Middle East everywhere in the news, and I want to give an update about that, focusing primarily on the U.S. response to the attacks against American troops in Jordan, and also some compelling statements that are coming out of Israel right now that hint that a wider war could be coming. The Middle East right now, as we look at it, is a boiling cauldron, and the lid could blow off at any moment. It's a powder keg and whose fuse could be lit at any moment in time. Just this week, the U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, issued a strong warning. He said this: incredibly volatile Middle East that hasn't been this dangerous since the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Now, that's quite a statement, because that's the October 1973 war. It's called sometimes the Ramadan War, the October War, but it's often called the Yom Kippur War because it was on the day of Yom Kippur, the most holy day in Israel, the Day of Atonement, when a coalition of Arab states led by Egypt and Syria attacked Israel in this surprise attack. And of course, on October 7th, when Hamas attacked Israel, there was 50 years and one day to the day of that Yom Kippur War. And I think that was significant that it happened at that point in time. But that's an amazing statement by our Secretary of State that the Middle East hasn't been this dangerous since 1973. Just this week, the Prime Minister of Qatar, and they've been involved in a lot of the negotiations of trying to get hostages released from Hamas in Gaza. He said regional tensions are boiling up. They're getting more concerning every day. And as we look at the Middle East today, we have to say he's right. I mean, the Middle East is burning. Before we begin our analysis of these current developments in the Middle East, I want to just give a brief preview of our subscriber-only segment that's coming up here in a few moments. Some of the questions we're going to answer. One question is about how does premillennialism relate to the rapture? Are those two connected in some way? Another question is there a difference between your spirit and your soul? That's going to go to the issue, is man, is humanity, are we three parts or are we just two parts? It's been some kind of an ongoing debate in church history. Another question is, it's written that there's no conflict or sin in heaven. If sin does not occur in heaven, what happened to Satan and a third of the angels? Isn't pride a sin? How did Satan and his cohorts commit their sin of pride while still in heaven? Great question. And finally, this last one, this is one that I know you're going to all want to think about with me. And that is, how can we be at peace in heaven if we know one of our children are in hell? That would apply to any loved one that we know. So we'll answer those questions a bit when we get to the subscriber only section. But we're all well aware now that this week an Iranian proxy, one of Iran's proxies, part of what's called the axis of resistance. The axis of resistance is all these proxies of Iran. It's Hezbollah. It's all these militia groups in Iraq and Syria. It's the Houthis down in Yemen. One of these groups hit a U.S. military logistics desert outpost in Jordan called Tower 22. 3 American soldiers, service members were killed. Dozens were wounded. And this finally, it seems like, has crossed a line with the current administration to take some strong action. We're waiting now for the U.S. response, and there's a lot of different options. There could be direct strikes against Iran, probably not likely. There could be attacks, probably very likely, on these proxies. There could be attacks against Iranian personnel abroad. Assassinations like when President Trump took out Soleimani. There could be economic measures that are taken. We could strike some of Iran's oil infrastructure. So a lot of options on the table. One headline this week says this: the U.S. response to a drone attack that killed 3 American service members in Jordan last weekend will be carried out over the course of several days, striking multiple targets. So this is going to be something that's going to last a while and probably hit multiple targets. We'll see what happens. But by using all these proxies to attack U.S. troops and bases in the Middle East and also Israel, Iran is gaining all the benefits without paying any direct cost. They're gaining all the benefits of harassing the United States and Israel, but they're not having to pay a direct cost. And the U.S. must make Iran pay a cost, a direct cost. And we'll see what that is. Now, since October 17th of 2023, so that's 10 days after Hamas attacked Israel, the Pentagon has recorded 165 attacks on U.S. personnel in the region. There have been 66 in Iraq, 98 in Syria, and then Sunday's deadly attack in Jordan. But approximately 80 service members have sustained injuries as a result of these attacks. And so the U.S. response must be strong and strategic. And you and I need to be praying for our leaders and for our troops during this time as Iran has to bear some cost for what they're doing. Now, at the same time that the U.S. is responding to these attacks that happened in Jordan against our troops there, Israel is talking about expanding the conflict beyond the war in Gaza. The Daily Mail has this headline: top Israeli minister says Iran is a legitimate target for missile strikes as fears grow of an all-out war between the countries. Israel's economy minister, his name is Nir Barkat, said Iran is now a legitimate target for missile strikes as fears grow of this all-out war. Barkat, again, he's this economy minister. He told the Telegraph that Palestinians from the West Bank will never be permitted to work in Israel again, and they'll import workers to take their place. He also argued the war against Hamas has not been aggressive enough. And this is the man that many believe is going to take over Benjamin Netanyahu's place as the leader of the Likud party in Israel. But he says this is this economy minister: Iran is a legitimate target for Israel. They will not get away with it. The head of the snake is Tehran. My recommendation is to adopt the strategy that President Kennedy used in the Cuban Missile Crisis. What he basically said then was a missile from Cuba will be answered by a missile from Moscow. And we should be very clearly making the case to the Iranians so that they understand they will not get away with using proxies against Israel and sleep good at night if we don't sleep good at night. We believe them when they say they want to destroy Israel. We're not going to allow another Holocaust. So Israel is pushing closer towards maybe launching missiles into Iran, but also Israel is pushing much closer to a full-scale war with Hezbollah up in southern Lebanon. And this economy minister, Nir Barkat, he argued a second war with Israel's main enemy right now up in Lebanon and Syria, which is Hezbollah, that Hezbollah needs to be eliminated. And ABC News has an article this week, or a headline, says Israel is closer to war with Hezbollah than ever before. So tens of thousands of regular Israeli troops are up in the north now. 60,000 reservists are there in the northern part of Israel. Israel has evacuated 100,000 people from northern Israel. And so as we look at what's happening there, it looks like Israel is going to go into the northern part or the southern part of Lebanon, and they're going to go ahead and try to eliminate Hezbollah at this time. And so, this thing, America wants to avoid a wider war. We keep hearing American leaders say we don't want this to escalate. It looks like Israel does want to escalate this to try to take care of a lot of these menaces that they have while all this is happening. Now, at the same time that all of this is developing in the Middle East, the Gog-Magog alliance is building. Read Ezekiel 38 and 39. It talks about after Israel's regathered to their land, that's Ezekiel 37, that a coalition of nations are going to invade Israel. And the Israel-Hamas war that started back on October 7th of last year is boosting the ties between Russia and Turkey and Iran, which are the three key nations mentioned there in Ezekiel 38. Again, they're mentioned under ancient places, but Rosh and Meshech, Tubal, Togarmah, Gomer, Persia, these are the places today that are Russia, Iran, and Turkey. And so these nations here, these key nations, are developing much closer ties as a result of the Hamas invasion against Israel. Just this week, the Turkish president named Erdogan and the Iranian president Raisi met in Ankara, Turkey. Now, in a great irony, what they met to discuss was how they could eliminate terror in the Middle East. You got the number one sponsor of terror in the Middle East, who's Iran, meeting with Turkey of how they can minimize terror in the Middle East. But the Jerusalem Post has an article this week that says, Putin's Russia and the Islamic Republic of Iran. And the subtitle says, the geopolitical tapestry of misinformation and imperial ambitions. And here's what the article says. This is fascinating. It's imperative to recognize the dynamics of regional alliances, especially the relationship between Iran and Russia. Increasingly, Tehran, that's the capital of Iran, seems to be acting not just as an ally, but as a proxy for Putin's ambitions in the Middle East, similar to how groups like Hamas and Hezbollah serve as proxies for Iran. Now, it's the first time I've read that someone has said that. You know, Iran has its proxies, again, Hezbollah, the Houthis, all these militia groups in Iraq and Syria. But this article is saying that Iran is really acting as a proxy for Russia to push Russia's agenda in the Middle East. And this is the Gog coalition, this predicted in Scripture. And I've said this before, but an article like this really brings it into even clearer focus. In Ezekiel 38, it talks about how Russia, that God's going to put hooks in the jaws to draw them into this conflict there in the land of Israel. And it appears to me that Iran could easily be those hooks in the jaws, as Russia's deepening its ties with Iran, and really that Iran is a proxy of Russia. And so when Iran wants to strike Israel at some point in the future, that's going to draw, I believe, Russia just kind of inexorably into this, drawn like a crocodile there on the banks of the Nile River, being drawn into this coalition to be part of this invasion of Israel in the end times. And of course, what all of this tells us is we have every reason to be looking for the coming of Jesus Christ at any moment. And we look forward in coming programs here to keep you updated on what's happening in these various places and these various events. Well, as always, again, thank you so much for being with us. And we're going to go into the subscriber-only section now, answer those great questions that I mentioned earlier, some wonderful questions for us to answer, to get us into a lot of different topics in God's Word. If you're not a subscriber, you'd like to be, you can go to endtimes.com for just the small price really today of $7 a month. You can be a subscriber and just have access to all kinds of great information. So we'll go into the subscriber-only section now and answer these questions.